Chapter 1. The Call of the Keep. The village of Mont was as lifeless as the dirt beneath Beaufort's hooves. Its people shuffled about in rags, their sunken faces turned away as I passed. The sight of a knight, however untested, seemed to bring them little comfort, their shoulders weighed down by something far heavier than poverty. I had come seeking glory, adventure, and a chance to prove myself, but what I found instead was despair. Beaufort snorted, shaking his head, and I patted his neck. "Patience, old friend," I said softly. "We will find our purpose here, even if they do not yet see it." As I dismounted near the village square, a group of villagers approached hesitantly. Their eyes darted to the sword at my hip and the shield slung across my back, as though even the sight of such symbols might invite some terrible doom upon them. An old man, bent with age and wrapped in a fraying cloak, stepped forward. His voice was hoarse, and his words trembled as he spoke. "Sir Knight, why have you come to Mont? This is no place for heroics. You must leave before it is too late." I removed my helm, holding it under one arm, and bowed my head to the elder. "I am Sir Julien de Calmont, Knight Errant. I go where I am needed and face what others fear. Tell me, good elder, what haunts this village so?" The man glanced toward the distant hill, where the dark silhouette of a ruined keep loomed like a vulture over its prey. "Mont, he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The keep is cursed, Sir Knight. Its halls are haunted by the spirits of fallen knights, bound by their sins. Any who enter are never seen again. Leave this place. You cannot save us." Whispers spread among the gathered villagers, their fear palpable. They clung to each other, as though my very presence had stirred the wrath of the keep. Yet their warnings did not dissuade me. Instead, they stoked the fire within my chest. "A curse, you say?" I asked, my voice steady. "If there is darkness within Mont, then it is my duty to face it. A knight cannot turn his back on the cries of the downtrodden." The elder's eyes, lined with countless years of sorrow, met mine. "Many have tried. All have failed. Brave men, strong men, they all vanished into the keep's shadow. What makes you think you will fare better?" His words carried the weight of truth, but I could not allow them to take root in my heart. I tightened my grip on Beaufort's reins and straightened my shoulders, letting the villagers see not just my armor, but the conviction behind it. "I am not like those men," I said firmly. "I do not seek riches or fame. My only aim is to prove myself worthy of the lady's blessing, and to live by the tenets of chivalry. If Mont is cursed, then I will lift that curse, or I will die trying." The elder sighed deeply, his expression a mix of pity and resignation. "Then you are a fool, young knight. But fools are often the only ones brave enough to try." I nodded my thanks, though his words struck a chord of doubt within me. Was I truly prepared for what lay ahead? The weight of my father's legacy hung heavy on my shoulders, a constant reminder of what was expected of me. Yet this was my chance to prove that I was more than just his son. As I mounted Beaufort once more, the villagers stepped aside, their murmurs trailing behind me. I could feel their eyes on my back as I rode toward the forest path that led to the keep. The mist thickened as I approached, curling around the trees like the fingers of some unseen hand. The elder's voice called out one last time, faint against the wind. "Beware, Sir Julien. The keep takes more than lives, it takes souls." I did not look back. A knight of Bretonnia must trust in the lady's guidance, and I had faith that she would see me through this trial. Mont awaited, its dark promise both a warning and a challenge. Gripping the reins tightly, I spurred Beaufort forward, my heart steady but my thoughts racing. This was not just a test of courage, it was a chance to prove that even in the face of despair, one night's light could banish the shadows. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Dark. The elder's warnings echoed in my mind as I urged Beaufort along the narrow, overgrown trail leading to Mont. The path was quiet, almost unnaturally so, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation of some unseen doom. I told myself it was the ramblings of frightened villagers that had painted the keep as cursed, their fear-warping shadows into specters. But as the last light of the sun faded behind the treetops, doubt whispered at the edges of my resolve. The forest closed in around me, the ancient oaks twisting like grotesque sentinels. Their limbs clawed at the sky, barren despite the season, and their gnarled roots pushed through the earth like knotted veins. Beaufort's ears twitched at every faint rustle, his usual calm replaced with a nervous energy I rarely saw in him. "Steady, my friend," I said, my voice cutting through the oppressive silence. "We've faced worse than shadows, you and I. Keep your courage." He snorted, as if to remind me that courage was as much mine to muster as his. I tightened my grip on the reins and pressed on, the weight of my father's shield slung across my back offering a small comfort. The deeper I rode into the forest, the stranger it became. The wind had died, yet the leaves above rustled faintly, as though stirred by something unseen. A chill crept into the air, sharp and biting, and I wrapped my cloak tighter around me. My hazel eyes scanned the dim trail, searching for movement but finding nothing more than shadows shifting against the thickening mist. And then the whispers began. At first I thought it was the wind, soft and distant, like the sigh of a mournful soul. But the longer I listened, the clearer it became. Voices. Low and indistinct, speaking in a language I could not understand. They flitted through the trees, darting from one direction to another, impossible to pinpoint. "Who speaks?" I called, my voice firm but tinged with unease. "Show yourself." The forest answered with silence, but the whispers soon returned, this time louder. Beaufort slowed, his hooves dragging against the path as if some invisible force held him back. I felt a prickle of unease along my spine, but I forced myself to push forward. "Courage, honor, redemption," I whispered, the words grounding me. My father's voice echoed in my memory, his lessons as clear now as they had been when I was a boy. A knight does not falter in the face of fear. He does not yield to the unknown. He stands firm, for his strength is his faith. Yet the forest seemed determined to test my resolve. I glimpsed a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shape too tall to be animal, cloaked in shadow. I turned, but it was gone, leaving only the faint rustle of leaves in its wake. My heart quickened despite myself, and I reached for my sword, its hilt a reassuring weight in my hand. "If you mean to challenge me," I said, my voice steady, despite the tightness in my chest, "then step into the light. I am Sir Julien de Calmont, and I do not fear the dark." But there was no answer, only laughter, low and guttural, reverberating through the trees like the growl of a beast. Beaufort reared, nearly throwing me from the saddle, and I struggled to calm him, my own nerves fraying with each passing moment. "Be calm, Beaufort," I said, though the command was as much for myself as for him. "We are almost there. Whatever lies ahead, we will face it together." The path began to slope upward, and the trees thinned, revealing the jagged silhouette of Mont against the starless sky. The keep loomed like a specter, its crumbling towers reaching for the heavens as if in defiance of their decay. The sight should have filled me with resolve, a reminder of the glory awaiting me if I succeeded. Instead, it brought a cold weight to my chest. Dismounting, I led Beaufort to a nearby tree and tethered him there. He pawed at the ground, his eyes wide with unease, but I stroked his neck and whispered a soft prayer to the lady, asking her to keep him safe. The gate of the keep stood ajar, its iron hinges rusted and its surface scarred with the passage of time. Beyond it lay darkness, thick and impenetrable. I drew my sword, the blade catching what little light remained, and stepped forward. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air changed. It was as if I had stepped into another world, one that had long since forgotten the warmth of the sun. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a chorus of unseen voices. "Welcome, knight," one of them hissed, a voice distinct from the rest, filled with malice. I froze, my hand tightening on my sword. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere, its tone mocking, as though it knew my thoughts, my fears. But fear was a luxury I could not afford. Gritting my teeth, I pressed onward, into the heart of the keep. If this was to be my trial, then I would face it as my father had faced his, with courage in my heart and faith guiding my every step. Chapter 3. The Gates of Mont. The keep loomed above me, its broken battlements jagged against the starless sky. Even in ruin, Mont held a grim majesty, its walls speaking of battles long past and secrets buried in stone. The gate stood before me, warped and rusted, but still massive enough to remind me that I was but one man before the weight of centuries. Beaufort stirred restlessly behind me, his breath puffing in the cold night air. I turned to him, running a hand along his neck. "You've carried me faithfully, old friend, but this next step is mine to take." He snorted, shaking his head, but I tethered him securely to a tree and offered him one last pat. The lady's light would guide me, as it had guided all knights before me. This was not a time for hesitation. Sword in hand, I approached the gate. The air grew heavier with each step, as though the keep itself exhaled a slow, oppressive breath. The faint whispers I had heard in the forest had fallen silent, replaced by a deeper, more menacing stillness. Reaching out, I pressed my gloved hand against the iron gate. The cold was shocking, biting through leather and mail alike. It resisted at first, as if reluctant to open, but with a groan that echoed through the empty courtyard beyond, the gate creaked inward. I hesitated, taking in the sight before me. The courtyard was overgrown, its cobblestones swallowed by weeds and moss. A faint mist coiled around the crumbled remains of walls and towers, and the air smelled of decay and damp stone. It was as if time itself had abandoned this place, leaving it to fester in its own shadows. Steeling myself, I stepped forward. The sound of my boots on the cobblestone seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. As I crossed the threshold, a chill crept over me. More than just the cold of the night, it was a deeper cold, one that settled into my bones and whispered of things better left undisturbed. Then came the sound. With a sudden, deafening groan, the gate behind me began to move. I turned, my heart quickening, but I could do nothing as the massive doors creaked shut of their own accord. The final clang of the gate locking into place reverberated through the air, sealing me inside. I reached for the iron, tugging at it, but it would not budge. My escape was gone, leaving only the path ahead. I gripped the hilt of my sword tightly, its familiar weight anchoring me against the surge of unease rising within. "The lady watches over me," I whispered, the words as much for myself as for any unseen ears. "Her light will guide my path." But there was no light here, only darkness. The silence of the courtyard pressed against me like a physical force, broken only by the faint rustling of the wind through the weeds. Yet even the wind felt wrong, its movement unnatural, as if stirred by something unseen. My eyes scanned the crumbling walls, the jagged towers, the faint outlines of what might once have been banners. Now they were nothing but tatters, their colors long faded, their glory forgotten. This was a place where knights had once stood proudly, where oaths were sworn and battles waged. But now it was hollow, filled only with echoes of what had been. The stories of the spectral knights returned to my mind unbidden. Had they, too, once walked this courtyard, their steps as resolute as mine? What had become of them? Had they fallen to some terrible foe, or had their own hubris undone them? I shook the thoughts from my mind. Speculation would not aid me here. Whatever awaited me in Mont, I would face it with the courage expected of a Knight of Bretonnia. "Come, then," I said aloud, my voice steady despite the knot tightening in my chest. "Whatever haunts this place, know that I am no mere adventurer. I am Sir Julien de Calmont, and I carry the honor of my house and the blessing of the lady. You will find me no easy prey." The mist seemed to shift at my words, curling closer as though in response. But there was no reply, only the stillness, broken by the faint sound of someone moving deeper within the keep. My hand tightened on my sword, and I took a step forward, then another. The shadows of Mont swallowed me whole, and the cold air whispered a silent promise. I was not alone. Yet fear would not claim me. My father's voice echoed in my mind, a memory of one of his many lessons. A knight does not falter in the face of the unknown. He presses forward, for his faith is his armor, his courage his blade. With those words in my heart, I pressed on into the darkness, ready to face whatever trials lay ahead. Chapter 4. The First Spectre. The courtyard stretched before me, silent and forgotten, its stones cracked and overgrown with weeds that had clawed their way through centuries of neglect. The mist clung to the ground like a shroud, curling around my boots with each cautious step. The silence was unnerving, oppressive, so complete that even the faintest scrape of my boot on stone felt deafening. The keep seemed alive in its stillness, watching, waiting. Shadows shifted at the edges of my vision, but each time I turned my head, they vanished, leaving only the faint impression that I was not alone. I pushed forward, my grip firm on my sword. My breath misted in the frigid air, the cold gnawing through my cloak and mail. Ahead, a ruined fountain stood at the center of the courtyard, its once proud figure of a knightly figurehead worn to a featureless husk. The water had long since dried, leaving only the hollow echo of what had once been. As I approached, a voice low, resonant, and filled with disdain cut through the silence. "Who dares disturb our rest?" I froze, my heart pounding as the mist seemed to gather before me, coalescing into a shape. The air grew colder still, and the faint hum of unnatural energy prickled my skin. Slowly, the figure solidified, a knight clad in spectral armor, its edges flickering like firelight on a stormy night. The knight's helm was battered, its visor concealing the face within, yet the eyes burned with an otherworldly light. Its voice, though distant, held an accusing tone as it spoke again. "You tread upon sacred ground, mortal. By what right do you defile it?" My first instinct was to speak of honor and purpose, to claim the righteousness of my quest. But my words caught in my throat as I beheld the specter, its form both awe-inspiring and terrible. It radiated the weight of ages, its presence heavy with sorrow and wrath. "I am Sir Julien de Calmont," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Knight Errant of Bretonnia. I come to cleanse this keep of the curse that plagues it." The specter's eyes flared brighter, and it raised its ethereal sword, the blade gleaming with a cold, pale light. "A knight?" It spat, the word laced with bitter mockery. Knighthood brought ruin to this place. Pride, ambition, betrayal, all the hallmarks of your ilk. You are no savior. You are an intruder, and your intrusion shall not go unpunished. The specter surged forward, its sword arcing toward me in a blur of cold fire. I barely had time to raise my shield, the impact reverberating through my arm like a thunderclap. The force of the blow sent me staggering back, my boots scraping against the stone. I recovered quickly, raising my sword to meet the next strike. The specter moved with an unnatural grace, its movements fluid and relentless. Each clash of our blades sent shards of icy light scattering into the air, the sound ringing like the toll of a mournful bell. "You are nothing but a boy playing at war," the specter growled, pressing its attack. "You seek glory as we once did. It will be your undoing." Its words stung, not because they were false, but because they struck at the doubts I had carried since I first took up my father's sword. I pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the rhythm of battle. The lessons my father had drilled into me from the time I could hold a blade. "Courage, honor, redemption," I murmured, each word a shield against the fear threatening to consume me. I parried a downward strike and countered with a thrust, my blade finding purchase in the specter's side. It let out a sound that was half snarl, half cry, and staggered back, the glow of its form flickering. "You fight well, boy," it said, its tone grudging. "But skill alone will not save you. This place will take you as it took us." The specter surged forward one final time, its sword descending in a deadly arc. I met the strike with all my strength, locking our blades together. For a moment we stood locked in place, my mortal strength against its spectral fury. Then, with a shout, I shoved it back, my blade cutting through its form. The specter let out a cry that echoed through the courtyard, its form breaking apart into tendrils of mist that dissipated into the air. The unnatural cold lifted slightly, and the oppressive silence returned. I stood there, chest heaving, my sword trembling in my hand. The weight of the encounter settled on me like a heavy cloak, and I realized just how close I had come to faltering. These nights were not mere stories, not figments conjured by frightened villagers. They were real, their wrath as tangible as my own blade. And I was not fighting against mere foes, but against the echoes of pride, of failure, of sins unredeemed. Wiping the sweat from my brow, I sheathed my sword and turned toward the keep's inner doors. My resolve had been shaken, but it had not broken. Whatever darkness awaited me, I would face it, not for glory, but for the promise of redemption, for them, for myself, and for all who carried the burden of the lady's call. The path ahead was dark, but my faith burned brighter still. Chapter 5. A Knight's Shame. The door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a hall cloaked in shadow and ruin. The stench of rot lingered in the stale air, mingling with the faint metallic tang of something far older, something lost to the centuries. The great hall of Mont stretched before me, its grandeur long since crumbled. Tattered banners hung from the vaulted ceiling, their colors faded, their sigils nearly unrecognizable. Dust blanketed the long wooden tables, now warped and splintered, where knights had once feasted in glory. The remnants of their revelry lay scattered, broken goblets, rusted platters, and bones too large to belong to any animal. I stepped cautiously across the cracked stone floor, my boots stirring faint clouds of dust with every step. There was a weight in the air, an unnatural heaviness that pressed against my chest. This was no mere ruin. The keep seemed to hold its breath, watching, waiting. Then I heard them. The voices began as whispers, faint and indistinct, rising and falling like the wind. But as I drew closer to the center of the hall, the whispers grew louder, taking on shape and form. Lies, one voice hissed, sharp and venomous. Greed, another spat, bitter and hollow. Betrayal, a third growled, its tone heavy with sorrow. The whispers swirled around me, and the room seemed to shift. The shadows thickened, coalescing into vague shapes, knights clad in spectral armor, their features blurred, their forms flickering like flames caught in a gust of wind. The hall came alive with ghostly echoes of a feast long past. Phantom knights sat at the decayed tables, their ghostly goblets raised in mockery of camaraderie. They spoke in low, guttural tones, their words laced with anger and despair. You swore an oath, one specter snarled, slamming its gauntleted fist against the table. And you broke it, another shouted, rising to its feet. The specters began to argue, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of blame and accusation. You turned on us? You betrayed the lady's trust. You sought glory for yourself. I stood frozen, my hand resting on the hilt of my sword. The weight of their words struck me like a blow. These were not the words of noble knights united by honor. They were the cries of broken men, their souls bound by guilt and hatred. The spectral scene shifted, and I saw flashes of the past, moments of treachery and violence. A knight drew his sword against his brother in arms, his face twisted with greed. Another cast aside his shield, abandoning his comrades in their hour of need. The hall became a battlefield, a place of betrayal and bloodshed. The whispers returned, softer now but no less damning. We were knights once, one voice murmured, heavy with regret. We swore to uphold the virtues. But pride consumed us. Greed drove us. And the lady turned her gaze from us. The ghostly feast dissolved, and the hall fell silent once more. The phantoms faded into the shadows, leaving me alone with the weight of their words. I sank to one knee, the echoes of their shame reverberating in my mind. These knights had once been noble, their oaths as sacred as my own. Yet they had fallen, their honor twisted into ruin. Their curse was no arbitrary punishment. It was a reflection of their sins. My hand tightened on the hilt of my sword, the familiar weight suddenly feeling heavier. Their story gnawed at the edges of my resolve, forcing me to confront a question I had buried deep within myself. Why had I come here? Was it truly to lift the curse of Mont, to prove myself worthy of the lady's blessing? Or was it something darker, pride, ambition, the need to carve my name into the annals of history as my father had done? I clenched my jaw, my hazel eyes fixed on the ground. I had spoken of virtue and faith, of courage and honor, but had I truly lived those ideals? Or had I merely worn them as a cloak to hide my own insecurities, my fear of falling short of my father's legacy? The phantom's words lingered, a warning etched into the stone walls of my heart. Their sins had bound them to this place, their hubris transforming a bastion of chivalry into a monument to failure. I rose slowly, my chest heavy with the weight of their shame and my own. My grip on my sword tightened, not out of fear but resolve. "I will not falter," I said aloud, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I will not become like you." The hall offered no reply, only the faint whisper of the wind through its broken walls. But the silence felt different now, less oppressive, more contemplative. With a deep breath, I turned toward the far end of the hall, where a grand staircase ascended into darkness. Whatever lay ahead, I would face it not for glory, but for redemption, for them, for myself, and for the virtues that must endure, even in the face of ruin. The lady's light would guide me, I told myself. Even here, in the heart of despair, her light would prevail. Chapter 6. The Spectral Gauntlet. The air grew colder as I climbed the staircase at the far end of the hall, the weight of the phantom's accusations pressing on me like an unseen burden. My legs felt leaden, my breath labored, though I had not yet drawn my sword in this new path. Each step echoed in the oppressive silence, the sound swallowed by the darkness that seemed to thicken as I ascended. At the top of the stairs, the corridor stretched endlessly before me, its walls lined with decayed tapestries and broken sconces. A faint glow emanated from the far end, and I followed it, my grip on my sword tightening with every step. The glow grew stronger, and soon I found myself in a large chamber. It was stark and empty save for the faint outlines of a dozen spectral figures standing in a circle. Each one radiated a cold, pale light, their armor gleaming faintly with an otherworldly hue. As I entered, the figures turned to face me in unison. Their hollow eyes burned with a pale fire, their faces obscured by the shadows of their helms. One stepped forward, its voice ringing out like the toll of a bell. "You would prove yourself a knight?" it asked, its tone devoid of mockery or warmth. "I am Sir Julien de Calmont," I replied, lifting my chin. "Knight Errant of Bretonnia. I seek to cleanse this keep and its curse." The spectral knight raised its sword, the blade shimmering like frozen starlight. "You claim to be a knight, yet knighthood is more than steel and words. It is courage. It is honor. It is compassion. These virtues will be tested, and only the worthy may pass." With a gesture of its hand, the figures surrounding it stepped forward, forming a semicircle around me. Each raised a weapon, their voices echoing with the weight of eternity. "The gauntlet awaits. Do you accept, or do you turn away?" I hesitated for the briefest moment, their challenge pulling at the edges of my resolve. My faith in myself had faltered in the hall below, their whispers of betrayal and failure stirring doubts I had never fully silenced. But I could not turn away. "I accept," I said firmly. The first knight stepped forward, its sword gleaming as it pointed toward me. "Then face courage," it said, its voice reverberating through the chamber. The world shifted around me. The chamber melted away, and I found myself standing on a narrow bridge suspended over an endless chasm. The stone beneath my feet was cracked and crumbling, and the air buzzed with a strange, oppressive energy. From the darkness below, something stirred. Shadows writhed and surged, taking on grotesque forms with glowing red eyes. They clawed at the edges of the bridge, their snarls echoing through the void. "Step forward," the knight's voice commanded. "Prove your courage." My heart pounded as I took my first step, the stone beneath me trembling ominously. The shadows reached for me, their claws raking the air inches from my boots. Another step, then another. The bridge shuddered violently, and for a moment I faltered. The darkness seemed alive, hungry, and my instincts screamed at me to turn back. But I clenched my jaw and pressed on, forcing my legs to move. The shadows lunged again, and I swung my sword in a desperate arc. The blade cut through the air, and the shadows recoiled, hissing. With a final defiant stride I crossed the bridge, my breath ragged but my resolve unbroken. The chasm dissolved, and I was back in the chamber. The first knight lowered its sword and stepped back, its hollow gaze fixed on me. "You have courage," it said, "but do you have honor?" Another knight stepped forward, its spectral presence towering over me. The world shifted again, and I found myself in the midst of a battlefield. Phantom soldiers clashed all around me, their cries filling the air with chaos. At my feet lay a fallen knight, his armor battered, his sword broken. He looked up at me with pleading eyes. "Help me," he gasped, his voice barely audible. "I cannot fight. They will overrun us." Ahead, I saw another knight battling against overwhelming odds. He was moments away from being overrun, his life hanging by a thread. "Choose," the spectral voice commanded. "Honor demands sacrifice. Whom will you save?" The choice was agonizing. I could not save them both. My heart wrenched as I knelt beside the fallen knight, pulling him to his feet. "Go," I said, placing my shield in his hands. "Run." With a final glance at the embattled knight, I charged forward, cutting down the specters that threatened to overwhelm him. My blade found its mark again and again, but my heart ached with the weight of the decision. The battlefield dissolved, and I was back in the chamber. The second knight stepped back, its voice solemn. "You have honor," it said, "but what of compassion?" The third knight approached, and the room shifted once more. I stood in a village much like Mont. The houses were aflame, and villagers screamed as spectral knights tore through the streets. A child clung to my leg, tears streaming down her face. "Help us, Sir Knight," she sobbed. Ahead, I saw the spectral knights closing in on a group of villagers trapped in a burning building. My path was clear, but the child's grip tightened, her cries pulling at my heart. I knelt, placing my hands on her shoulders. "Stay here," I said gently. "I will protect you." I charged into the fray, cutting down the spectral knights with every ounce of strength I had left. The flames licked at my armor, the heat searing my skin, but I pressed on, reaching the trapped villagers and leading them to safety. When I turned back, the child was gone, her form dissolving into mist. The chamber returned, and the final knight stepped back. "You have compassion," it said. I sank to my knees, my strength spent, my doubts heavier than ever. The knights faded, leaving me alone in the silence. Their trials had tested me, and though I had endured, I could feel the cracks in my resolve. Was I truly worthy of the path I had chosen? Or was I merely delaying the moment I too would falter? I rose slowly, gripping my sword tightly. Whatever the answer, I would find it in the heart of Mont. Chapter 7. The Betrayer's Tale. The library of Mont was a skeleton of its former self, a decayed monument to knowledge long forgotten. The heavy scent of mold and damp paper hung in the air, mingling with the faint tang of old ink. Shelves that had once towered with pride now leaned precariously, their contents scattered across the stone floor. Books and scrolls lay in disarray, their spines cracked, their pages eaten away by time. I tread carefully among the wreckage, my boots crunching on brittle fragments of parchment. The silence here was different, less oppressive than in the halls below, but no less eerie. It felt watchful, as though the room itself awaited something. As I ran my fingers along the spine of an intact tome, my eyes caught the glint of something unusual. A heavy, iron-bound book rested on a pedestal at the center of the library, its surface etched with strange symbols. The air around it seemed heavier, as though the weight of its contents extended beyond its physical form. I approached cautiously, my sword still drawn, though it felt woefully inadequate against the unseen forces of this place. The pedestal was cracked, and the book's edges were blackened, as if it had survived a great fire. With a deep breath, I reached out and opened the book. Its pages crackled as I turned them, the brittle parchment threatening to crumble under my touch. The words within were written in an elegant hand, their ink faded but legible. It was a chronicle. The early entry spoke of a thriving order of knights, sworn to the Lady of the Lake and dedicated to protecting Bretonnia. Mont had once been a bastion of virtue, its halls filled with the echoes of song, laughter, and oaths of fealty. But as I read further, the tone shifted. There were mentions of discord among the knights, jealousies and rivalries that had begun to fester like an unseen wound. The name Sir Armand du Noir appeared often, always cloaked in whispers of ambition. Then came the passage that froze my blood. It was he, the black betrayer, who set the wheels of our doom in motion. Sir Armand, once the pride of our order, turned his back on the lady. Consumed by his desire for power and immortality, he forged an unholy pact. We trusted him, and he led us to ruin. The words blurred for a moment as I struggled to grasp their full meaning. A knight, a sworn servant of the lady, had betrayed his brothers for his own gain. The chronicle went on, describing how Sir Armand had led the knights into a battle they could not win, sacrificing them to dark forces in exchange for a power he could not control. The curse of Mont was his doing. His treachery had bound the souls of the knights to this place, chaining them to an eternity of torment. I closed the book, the echo of its final words reverberating in my mind. He resides still within these walls, his spirit unbroken, his ambition undying. The black betrayer waits, ever seeking new souls to join his court of the damned. I stepped back from the pedestal, the weight of the truth pressing heavily on my chest. The phantoms I had faced were not merely the victims of misfortune or the whims of a curse. They were the remnants of a betrayal so profound it had corrupted their very souls. For a moment I could not move. My faith, already tested by the trials of this place, wavered further. If one knight could fall so far, what guarantee was there that I would not do the same? Was I truly strong enough to face the black betrayer and resist the darkness he offered? The thought burned, but I forced it aside. I could not allow doubt to take root. The Lady of the Lake had guided me here, not to falter, but to confront this evil and cleanse it from the world. "I will not be like you, Sir Armand," I said aloud, my voice steady despite the storm within me. "Your ambition will die here, as will the curse you have wrought." The library seemed to respond, the air growing colder, heavier. The shadows lengthened, and the faint sound of whispering began to fill the room. I turned toward the door, my grip tightening on my sword. Sir Armand was waiting for me. The chronicle had shown me the path, but the battle ahead would test every ounce of strength, courage, and faith I possessed. The black betrayer had turned his back on the lady, but I would not. The time had come to face him and end this curse once and for all. Chapter 8. A Test of Humility. The corridors beyond the library seemed endless, their stone walls cracked and worn by the weight of time. The only sound was the faint echo of my footsteps as I pressed forward, my thoughts heavy with the knowledge of the black betrayer's treachery. His name lingered in my mind like a poison, stirring doubts I struggled to silence. The path split ahead, one branch descending into deeper darkness, while the other led to a ruined wing of the keep. I hesitated, scanning the shadows for any sign of what lay ahead. That was when I heard it, a voice, faint and trembling, calling out from the gloom. "Please, someone help me." I turned sharply, my hand instinctively gripping my sword. The voice came again, closer now, tinged with desperation. "Sir Knight, I beg you." A figure emerged from the shadows, a young man, translucent and pale, his form flickering like a flame caught in a breeze. He wore the trappings of a squire, his tunic torn and his hands clutching a faintly glowing object. His spectral eyes were wide with sorrow as he knelt before me. "Please," he said, his voice trembling. "I have failed, my lord. I must set things right, but I cannot do it alone. Will you help me?" For a moment I stared at him, uncertain. This was no knightly foe, no grand challenge to overcome. He was pitiable, weak. Part of me balked at the thought of aiding him when my quest demanded so much of my strength and focus. "I am here to end the curse of Mont, I said, my tone firmer than I intended. "I cannot be distracted by every lost soul within these walls." His gaze fell, his form flickering as though my words had wounded him. "I understand," he said softly. "I am nothing, a squire, forgotten in life and in death. My task is insignificant compared to your quest." I felt a twinge of guilt at his words, but I pushed it aside. There was no glory in retrieving a token for a fallen squire. What would my father have said if he had seen me waste time on such a trivial task? And yet, I paused, my grip loosening on my sword. The Lady of the Lake had called me to be more than a seeker of glory. A knight is meant to protect the weak, to honor their oaths not just in battle, but in compassion. Had I already forgotten the lessons my mother had whispered to me as a child, the stories of knights who carried the burdens of others without thought of reward? "Tell me," I said, my voice softer now. "What is it you need of me?" The squire's eyes lit with a faint hope as he held out the object in his hands, a fragment of a broken sword. "This was my lord's blade," he said. "I failed to bring it to him when he needed it most. He fell in battle because of me. His spirit cannot rest until I return it to him." I knelt before him, examining the shard. Its edges gleamed faintly, imbued with the same spectral light that clung to the squire. "Where is your lord?" I asked. "He resides in the chapel," the squire said, "but the path is guarded by specters far stronger than I can face." I nodded, rising to my feet. "Lead the way." The squire hesitated, as though unsure of my sincerity. When I motioned for him to move, he finally turned and guided me through the ruined wing. The path was treacherous, filled with collapsed stone and the faint traces of other restless spirits. When we reached the chapel, I found the way blocked by 3 spectral knights. Their armor glimmered faintly, their swords drawn and ready. "You shall not pass," one of them intoned. "The living are not welcome here." I stepped forward, raising my blade. "I do not seek to defile this place. I come to honor a knight's memory and bring peace to his squire." The knights moved as one, their spectral forms surging toward me. The battle was swift and brutal, each clash of our blades reverberating through the cold air. Though they fought with the skill and strength of warriors long dead, I held my ground, drawing on the resolve that had carried me this far. When the last specter dissolved into mist, I turned to the squire, who stood trembling at the threshold. He stepped forward, the shard of his lord's sword clutched tightly in his hands. The chapel was a ruin, its once proud altar covered in dust and debris. At its center knelt the form of a knight, his figure as pale and flickering as the squire's. When the squire approached, the knight looked up, his hollow eyes filling with recognition. "My lord," the squire said, his voice breaking, "forgive me. I have returned your blade." The knight reached out, taking the shard in his hands. A faint glow spread through his form, and he rose to his feet. "You have done well," the knight said, his voice steady. "You have fulfilled your duty, even in death." The 2 figures embraced, their forms fading into the air as a faint warmth spread through the chapel. For the first time since entering Mont, I felt a glimmer of peace. As I turned to leave, I could not help but reflect on what had just transpired. The act had not brought me glory. It would not be sung in the halls of Bretonnia or carved into the annals of my family. But it had brought peace to a tormented soul, and in doing so, it had reminded me of what it truly meant to be a knight. A knighthood was not about fame or renown. It was about service, about bearing the burdens of others with honor and humility. As I stepped back into the shadowed halls of the keep, my steps felt lighter, my purpose clearer. The black betrayer still awaited, but I would face him not as a seeker of glory, but as a servant of the lady and the virtues she had entrusted to all her knights. Chapter 9. The Lady's Warning. The halls of Mont seemed to twist and turn in ways that defied reason, as if the keep itself sought to confuse and disorient me. My torch flickered in the chill air, its light struggling against the oppressive darkness that clung to the stones like a second skin. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon me, their presence both oppressive and watchful. As I rounded a corner, the faintest glimmer of light caught my attention. It was soft, pale, and unearthly, spilling from beneath a heavy wooden door set into the wall. The door was adorned with carvings of ivy and lilies, their delicate shapes faded with time but unmistakable in their origin. The Lady of the Lake. I hesitated, my heart quickening. The stories of her shrines scattered across Bretonnia were countless, each a beacon of hope and guidance for those who followed her path. That such a place could exist here within these cursed walls was both a mystery and a blessing. Pushing the door open, I entered a small circular chamber. The air here was different, warmer, lighter, as though untouched by the decay that plagued the rest of the keep. At the center of the room stood a simple altar, hewn from smooth stone, and draped with tattered cloth embroidered with the symbol of the lady, the chalice of life. Above it, a single beam of light shone down, illuminating the altar in a glow that seemed otherworldly. I fell to my knees, the weight of my journey pressing down upon me. For a moment, I said nothing, letting the silence of the shrine wrap around me like a balm. Then, bowing my head, I began to pray. "Lady of the Lake, guide me," I whispered. My voice trembled, the words spilling forth like a river breaking through a dam. "I have come to this place to cleanse it of its curse, but doubt festers in my heart. I fear I am not worthy of the path I tread, that my pride and ambition will lead me astray. Grant me your wisdom, that I may walk the path of virtue and honor." The light above the altar flickered, and the air grew still. For a moment, I thought I had offended her, that my doubts had proven me unworthy even of her presence. But then, the light began to shift, growing brighter, more radiant. A voice, soft and serene, filled the chamber. It was not spoken aloud, but felt within my very soul, a melody that resonated with every fiber of my being. "Sir Julien, my faithful servant, you have come far, but the road ahead is fraught with peril. The curse of Mont is not born of darkness alone, but of hubris and pride, the flaws that dwell within the hearts of men." The words pierced me like a blade, their truth undeniable. I clenched my fists, the weight of my own shortcomings bearing down upon me. "Lady," my voice faltered, "I have sought to walk the path of chivalry, to honor the virtues you hold dear, but I fear that I have failed." The light shimmered, and within it, I saw the faintest outline of her form, ethereal, radiant, her presence both humbling and uplifting. "Failure is not in the faltering, but in the refusal to rise again," she said. "You are human, Sir Julien, and you will stumble. But you must recognize the shadows within yourself if you are to banish those that plague this keep." Her image shifted, and I saw fleeting visions, moments of the past and future, blurred and fleeting. The knights of Mont, their pride and greed turning them against one another. The black betrayer, his ambition driving him to treachery. Myself standing on the precipice of a choice I could not yet see. "The black betrayer was not born of darkness," the lady said, her voice tinged with sorrow. "He was a knight like you, proud and strong, but his pride became his undoing. To face him is to face the flaws within yourself. Only then can you triumph." The vision began to fade, the light dimming as the chamber returned to stillness. Desperation welled within me, and I reached out, my voice breaking. "Lady, wait. I do not know if I am strong enough. How can I be sure I will not fail as he did?" Her voice came one last time, soft and distant, like a breeze carrying the scent of lilies. "Faith, Sir Julien. Faith in me, and in yourself." The light disappeared, and I was alone once more. The warmth of the chamber lingered, but it did little to ease the turmoil in my heart. I rose slowly, my legs trembling beneath me. Her words had struck at the core of my being, laying bare the doubts and fears I had sought to bury. But they had also given me clarity. The battle ahead was not merely against the black betrayer, it was a battle within myself, against the pride and ambition that could so easily lead me down his path. I placed my hand on the altar, bowing my head one final time. "I will not fail you, my lady," I vowed, my voice steady now. "I will face the shadows, both within and without, and I will see this curse lifted." With renewed resolve, I turned and left the shrine, the echoes of her voice carrying me forward into the dark. Chapter 10. The Gathering Storm. The air grew heavier with every step I took toward the heart of Mont, each breath a labor against the oppressive weight of the keep's dark power. The torches lining the hall flickered weakly, their flames consumed by the shadows that seemed to pulse and writhe, alive with malice. The walls, though still stone, felt as though they were closing in, the space itself warping under the strain of the curse. This was the heart of the darkness. I could feel it. The lady's shrine had given me renewed purpose, but that purpose was now tested with every step. Ahead, the corridor opened into a vast hall, its size dwarfing every room I had seen before. Moonlight streamed weakly through shattered windows, illuminating the scene within, a gathering of spectral knights, their forms flickering with an unearthly glow. They stood in formation, A dozen or more, their ghostly armor gleaming faintly, their swords drawn and ready. At their head was a knight taller and broader than the rest, his armor marked with ancient sigils that pulsed with an ominous light. As I entered, the hall fell deathly silent, save for the faint clinking of ethereal chains. The leader of the knights stepped forward, raising his blade toward me. His hollow voice echoed through the chamber, carrying the weight of centuries. "Another fool come to claim redemption," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "You will find none here mortal, only death and servitude." I raised my sword and shield, my stance firm though my heart raced. "I am Sir Julien de Calmont, Knight Errant of Bretonnia. I come not to claim redemption, but to bring it, to free this keep from the curse that binds it." The knight's laughter rang hollow, a sound devoid of mirth. "Bold words, boy, but words mean nothing here. Prove yourself or join us in eternal torment." The spectral knights advanced as one, their movements deliberate and inexorable. I steadied myself, my hazel eyes darting from one opponent to the next, seeking an opening. They were too many to face head-on. I needed more than skill to prevail. "Courage, honor, redemption," I whispered, invoking the motto of my house. But the weight of those words felt heavier now, their meaning tested in the crucible of this moment. The first knight lunged, his sword arcing through the air with an eerie speed. I raised my shield just in time, the clash reverberating through my arm. Another came from my left, and I twisted, parrying with my sword. Their strikes were relentless, each blow sapping my strength. I fought desperately, but for every specter I struck down, another seemed to rise in its place. The air grew colder, the whispers of the curse gnawing at my resolve. My arms ached, and doubt began to creep into my mind. How could I defeat them all? Then, an idea took root, a thought born of the lady's guidance. These knights were not mindless shades, they were men once, bound by the same oaths that guided me. If there was any shred of honor left in them, perhaps it could be awakened. "Enough," I shouted, my voice cutting through the din of battle. I stepped back, lowering my sword but keeping my shield raised. "Is this what you have become? Hollow echoes of the knights you once were?" The spectral knights hesitated, their movements slowing. The leader stepped forward, his burning eyes fixed on me. "What do you know of what we were? We swore oaths, just as you have, and we were betrayed by one of our own. There is no redemption for us, only vengeance." "And yet you still stand together," I said, my voice firm but steady. "You still fight as one, bound by the bonds of brotherhood. That is not vengeance, that is honor, buried beneath the weight of this curse. Do not let it consume you further." The leader's sword wavered, the light of his form flickering like a candle in the wind. The other knights exchanged glances, their hollow eyes dimming as if caught in memory. "Your oaths meant something once," I continued, stepping forward cautiously. "You were knights, protectors of Bretonnia, servants of the lady. That cannot be erased, no matter how far you have fallen. Stand aside and let me confront the one who has bound you here. Let me end this." For a long moment the hall was silent, the spectral knights frozen in place. Then, slowly, the leader lowered his sword. His voice, once filled with disdain, softened, though it still carried the weight of despair. "If you truly wish to end this," he said, "then you must face the betrayer. But know this, he will test you in ways you cannot imagine. If you falter, your soul will be forfeit." "I will not falter," I replied, my voice steady. "Not with the lady's light to guide me." The leader stepped aside, his form flickering as if the act of yielding had drained him. One by one, the other knights followed, their spectral forms parting to reveal the path ahead. "You may pass, Sir Julien de Calmont," the leader said, "but tread carefully. The betrayer is cunning, and his darkness is deep. Go, and may the lady watch over you." I bowed my head in gratitude, my chest heavy with a mixture of relief and foreboding. As I stepped through the gathered knights, their forms began to fade, their ethereal light dimming until they were little more than shadows in the mist. The path before me was clear, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on my shoulders. The black betrayer awaited, and with him, the culmination of my trial. Drawing a deep breath, I pressed onward, my resolve unshaken but my heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. Chapter 11. The Betrayer's Court. The air in the heart of Mont was different, thicker, colder, and alive with an oppressive energy that gnawed at the edges of my resolve. The faint light of my torch barely pierced the shadows, which seemed to gather and twist with malicious intent. I felt as though the keep itself was watching, waiting for me to falter. The corridor ended abruptly at a massive door, its wood blackened and scorched, its surface etched with symbols I could not read but instinctively feared. The air around it shimmered faintly, as though the door itself pulsed with the power that poisoned this place. My grip tightened on the hilt of my sword. I had come too far to turn back, no matter what awaited me beyond this threshold. I pushed the door open, its heavy weight groaning as it swung inward to reveal a vast chamber. The room was a throne hall, or at least it had been. The walls were lined with crumbling statues of knights, their faces worn to nothing by time and neglect. At the far end of the chamber stood a great throne of black stone, jagged and unyielding, like a shard of the keep itself. Upon it sat a figure clad in armor darker than any shadow, its edges gleaming faintly, as if lit from within by an unholy fire. The Black Betrayer. He rose as I entered, his movements slow and deliberate. His helmet obscured his face, but his eyes burned with a sickly green light, and his presence filled the chamber like a storm about to break. "So," he said, his voice deep and resonant, echoing in the vast emptiness. "Another knight come to challenge me. Tell me, boy, what drives you to this folly? Fame? Glory? Redemption?" I stepped forward, my shield raised, my blade steady despite the fear clawing at the edges of my mind. "I am Sir Julien de Calmont, Knight Errant of Bretonnia. I come not for myself, but to end the curse you have wrought upon this place and its people." The betrayer laughed, a hollow, mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Is that what you tell yourself? That you are different from those who came before you? How noble. How naive." He descended from the throne, his steps echoing with a weight that seemed to shake the very foundations of the keep. "You think yourself righteous, boy? You think your quest is pure? Do not insult me with such lies. I know what burns in your heart. I have seen it before." I stood my ground, but his words struck a nerve, stirring doubts I had tried to bury. "You seek the Grail, do you not?" he continued, circling me like a predator. "You chase the favor of a goddess you barely understand, hoping that her blessing will make you whole. But tell me this, Sir Julien, why do you truly seek it? Is it to serve, or is it to be remembered? To stand in the shadow of your father no longer?" I gritted my teeth, his words cutting deeper than any blade. "My reasons are my own," I said, though my voice faltered. The betrayer stopped, his burning gaze fixed on me. "Ah, there it is, the doubt. It eats at you, doesn't it? You wonder if you are worthy, if you will falter as I did. Let me tell you, boy, you are not so different from me. I, too, sought to prove myself, to rise above my peers, to claim a place among the greats. And look where it brought me." He gestured to the chamber around him, his voice rising. "This keep, this curse, it is a monument to the truth of knighthood. Ambition is a poison, and honor is a lie." "You are wrong," I said, my voice steadier now. "You betrayed your oaths, your brothers, and the lady herself. That is why you fell, not because of ambition, but because you turned your back on the virtues that define us." The betrayer's laugh died, and his form seemed to grow darker, more imposing. "You think yourself virtuous? Prove it, boy. Show me the strength of your convictions." With a roar, he lunged, his massive blade cleaving through the air with terrifying speed. I barely raised my shield in time, the impact reverberating through my arm. He pressed the attack, each strike heavier and faster than the last, forcing me back with every step. "You are weak," he spat, his voice filled with venom. "You cling to your ideals like a child clutching a toy, but they will not save you." I gritted my teeth, parrying another blow and stepping to the side. "They are not toys, they are my purpose, my guide. They are what separate me from you." He swung again, and I ducked, driving my sword forward in a desperate counterattack. The blade found its mark, slicing through his armor, but he barely flinched. "You fight well," he said, his tone grudging. "But skill alone is not enough. You must prove your resolve. Do you have the strength to face the truth of what you are?" The room seemed to darken further, the shadows rising like a tide. The betrayer's form loomed larger, his voice echoing in my mind. "Do you have the strength to overcome yourself?" The words struck me like a hammer, and for a moment I faltered. But then, deep within, I felt the warmth of the lady's light, a faint but steady flame that refused to be extinguished. "I do," I said, my voice firm, "not because I am without fault, but because I strive to be better. I will not let doubt or pride define me. I am more than my flaws." The betrayer paused, his burning gaze narrowing. "We shall see," he said, his voice heavy with foreboding. "The true test lies ahead, Sir Julien. Prepare yourself, for you have only begun to face the darkness." With that, he stepped back, his form fading into the shadows. The chamber fell silent once more, but his presence lingered, a chilling reminder of the battle yet to come. I lowered my sword, my breath coming in ragged gasps. His words had shaken me, but they had not broken me. I would press on, not because I was certain of my victory, but because I had no other choice. The black betrayer awaited me in the heart of Mont, and I would face him with all the strength and faith I could muster. Chapter 12. The Duel of Redemption. The chamber was silent, but for the faint hum of power emanating from the figure before me. The black betrayer stood at the center of the room, his dark armor gleaming with a sickly greenish light. His blade was massive, a jagged weapon that seemed forged from shadow and despair itself. He moved with an unearthly grace, each step deliberate, as though savoring the moment. "You have come far, Sir Julien," he said, his voice a low rumble that echoed through the hall. "But courage alone will not save you. The lady may have sent you here, but it is not her hand that wields your sword. This is your battle, and you will fail." I tightened my grip on my blade, my fingers trembling slightly as the weight of his words settled over me. He wasn't merely threatening my life, he was attacking the very foundation of my resolve, the ideals I had sworn to uphold. I raised my shield and stepped forward, my voice firm, despite the fear gnawing at my heart. "I am no stranger to failure," I said, "but I will not let it define me. My faith in the lady, and in the virtues of knighthood, is stronger than your lies." The betrayer laughed, the sound sharp and grating, like steel scraping against stone. "Faith? Virtue. They are fleeting illusions, boy, meant to blind you to the truth. There is no glory in servitude. There is only power, and the will to take it." He raised his sword, its edge glowing with a faint, eerie light, and lunged. The force of his attack was monstrous, the blow sending me staggering back. I barely managed to parry the second strike, the clash of our blades ringing out like a thunderclap. The duel began in earnest, his strikes coming fast and relentless. Each swing of his blade was a challenge to my skill, my strength, and my very belief in myself. The air between us crackled with energy, the darkness of the chamber roiling like a living thing. "You fight well," he said, his tone mocking, "but you are holding back. You fear what you might become if you truly give yourself to this battle." I gritted my teeth, blocking another strike. His words burrowed into my mind, stirring memories of every failure, every moment of doubt. I saw flashes of my father standing tall and proud, his shadow looming over me. I saw myself struggling to match his legacy, always falling short. Was that why I was here? To prove that I was worthy, not to the lady, but to the memory of a man who could no longer judge me. The betrayer pressed his advantage, his strikes growing heavier, more precise. "Do you see now?" he growled. "You are no different from me. You fight not for honor, but to escape your own weakness. You seek to prove yourself, but there is no one left to care." The words stung, but as the blows rained down, something within me began to shift. My father's face, once a source of both inspiration and doubt, softened in my mind's eye. The lessons he had taught me, the stories of the Grail Knights and their deeds, returned to me not as burdens, but as reminders of why I had begun this journey. "You're wrong," I said, my voice steady now. I stepped forward, meeting his next strike with all my strength. "This isn't about proving myself. It's about something greater." The betrayer hesitated, his form flickering as if my words had struck him more deeply than my blade. I seized the moment, pressing the attack. My strikes were not born of anger or desperation, but of purpose, each one a declaration of my resolve. "True knighthood is not about glory or legacy," I said, my voice rising with each blow. "It's about service, to the lady, to the virtues, and to those who cannot defend themselves. It's about standing for what is right, even when no one is watching." The chamber seemed to shift, the oppressive darkness lifting slightly as I spoke. The betrayer staggered, his blade faltering as he struggled to regain his footing. "Silence," he roared, his voice trembling with a mixture of fury and fear. "You know nothing of what I have endured." "I know enough," I replied. "You fell because you let pride and ambition blind you. But it is not too late to find peace. Let go of the darkness and free yourself from this curse." The betrayer froze, his sword lowering slightly. For a brief moment I saw the man he had once been, a knight, proud and strong, his armor gleaming with the light of Bretonnia. But the vision was fleeting, and the shadows reclaimed him. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It is too late for me. But not for you. Prove yourself, Sir Julien. Show me that the virtues I betrayed still hold meaning." With a final, desperate roar, he lunged. I met his blade head-on, our swords clashing with a force that shook the very foundations of the keep. Light and shadow erupted around us, the energy of our duel tearing through the chamber. And then, with one final strike, I drove my blade through his chest. His form shuddered, the shadows dissipating as the unholy light in his eyes faded. He fell to his knees, his sword clattering to the ground. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice no longer filled with malice. "Perhaps you are the knight I could not be." His form dissolved into mist, the oppressive weight of the curse lifting with him. The chamber was silent once more, but the air felt lighter, purer. I stood there, my sword still in hand, my chest heaving with the weight of what had just transpired. This victory was not mine alone. It belonged to the lady, to the virtue she upheld, and to the countless knights who had fallen before me. I sheathed my sword and bowed my head, offering a silent prayer. "Lady of the Lake, guide him to peace," I whispered, "and guide me, that I may never stray from the path you have set before me." With renewed resolve, I turned and left the chamber. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time I felt truly worthy of the path I walked. Chapter 13. The Breaking of the Curse. The chamber was silent, the oppressive weight of the black betrayer's presence lifted. Yet, as I stood amidst the darkness, I could feel the curse lingering in the air, its tendrils still woven deeply into the keep stones, refusing to release their grip. The betrayer's final words echoed in my mind. "Prove yourself, Sir Julien. Show me that the virtues I betrayed still hold meaning." I knelt where he had fallen, my sword planted in the cracked stone before me. The lady's light had guided me to this moment, but I knew my task was not yet complete. Victory in combat was not enough. To truly free Mont, I needed her blessing, a cleansing of this place from the taint of its sins. I closed my eyes, bowing my head in prayer. "Lady of the Lake," I whispered, my voice trembling, "you have guided me thus far, and I have sought to uphold your virtues in the face of doubt and despair. But this curse, it is beyond my strength alone. I humbly ask for your light, to cleanse this keep and grant peace to those who have suffered in its shadow." The air grew still, the faint remnants of the betrayer's power retreating as a warmth spread through the room. The light began softly, a golden glow emanating from the shattered remains of the altar at the far end of the chamber. It grew brighter, filling the room with a radiance that pushed back the shadows and bathed the stone walls in a warmth I had not felt since entering this cursed place. I rose to my feet, my heart swelling with a mixture of awe and resolve. The lady's light was with me, a beacon against the darkness. Taking up my sword, I turned toward the center of the chamber, where the betrayer's essence had lingered. The cursed energy still pulsed faintly, a festering wound upon the keep. I raised my blade high, the light of the lady reflecting off its steel. "In the name of the Lady of the Lake," I called, my voice echoing through the chamber. "I cast you out. Let this place be cleansed of its sins, and let its spirits find peace." The light surged, flowing from the blade and washing over the chamber. It raced outward, a tide of golden brilliance that swept through the keep. The stones trembled beneath my feet, and I heard the distant cries of the spectral knights as the light reached them. In the courtyard, I saw them, phantom figures standing tall, their forms no longer twisted by anguish and despair. They turned to face me, their hollow eyes filled with a quiet gratitude. One by one, they knelt, their swords planted in the ground before them. The leader of the spectral knights rose first, his form flickering as the light began to dissolve him. "You have done what we could not," he said, his voice no longer bitter, but filled with a quiet dignity. "You have upheld the virtues we betrayed. May the lady's light guide you always, Sir Julien." With those words, he faded into the air, his armor and sword dissolving into motes of golden light. The others followed, their forms dissipating until the courtyard was empty save for me, and the faint glow of the lady's blessing lingering in the air. The keep began to tremble, the very foundations of its dark magic unraveling. Cracks spread through the walls, and the towers that had loomed so menacingly now began to crumble. The curse that had held this place for centuries was breaking, its power unraveling under the weight of the lady's light. I turned and ran, the walls groaning and collapsing around me. Dust and debris filled the air as I sprinted through the ruined halls, the path ahead illuminated by the fading glow of the lady's blessing. When I reached the courtyard, the gates were open, the oppressive force that had sealed them now gone. Beaufort stood waiting for me, his ears flicking nervously at the rumble of the collapsing keep. I swung into the saddle and urged him forward, galloping down the path that led away from Mont. As I looked back, the keep crumbled entirely, its towers and walls collapsing in on themselves until nothing remained but a hollow ruin, bathed in the faint light of the rising sun. I brought Beaufort to a halt at the edge of the forest, turning to gaze at the ruins. A sense of peace washed over me, a quiet assurance that the curse had been lifted, and the souls bound to Mont had found their rest. I bowed my head, murmuring a final prayer. "Lady of the Lake, thank you. Your light has guided me, and I will carry this lesson in my heart. True knighthood is not about proving one's worth, but serving a cause greater than oneself. May I always walk your path with humility and honor." The wind carried the faint scent of lilies, a quiet reminder of her presence. As the sun rose fully over the horizon, I turned Beaufort toward the road ahead. My journey was far from over, but for the first time I felt truly worthy of the title I bore. The keep had been cleansed, its curse broken, and its story would remain with me, a lesson in the power of faith, humility, and redemption. Chapter 14. The Duel of Redemption. The chamber pulsed with an unnatural energy, the air heavy with the weight of centuries of torment and despair. At the center of it all stood the black betrayer, his dark armor gleaming with an unholy light, his burning eyes fixed on me with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. His jagged sword rested lightly in his hand, but I knew it could strike with the force of a thunderbolt. He did not move as I stepped forward, his voice breaking the oppressive silence. "You have come far, Sir Julien," he said, his tone almost mocking. "Farther than any who have dared to face me. You have courage, I will grant you that. But courage alone will not save you." I raised my sword, its blade reflecting the faint light that seemed to emanate from nowhere. My shield felt heavier than ever, its weight a reminder of the battles I had fought to reach this point. "I did not come seeking salvation," I replied, my voice firm. "I came to end the curse you have wrought on this place and its people. Your time is over." The betrayer laughed, a hollow sound that seemed to echo from every corner of the room. "You think yourself righteous, pure. Do not insult me with such lies. You are no different from the others who came before you, another fool, chasing glory, blinded by the illusion of honor." He stepped closer, his movements fluid and deliberate. "But I will offer you this chance. Join me. Cast aside the lies of virtue and the false promises of the lady. Together, We could build something greater than this cursed husk of a keep. The world does not need knights. It needs those strong enough to seize their destiny." For a moment, his words hung in the air, and I felt the faintest flicker of doubt. His power was undeniable, his presence commanding. But as I met his gaze, I saw the truth behind his offer: emptiness, desperation, and a soul twisted by the weight of his own betrayal. I tightened my grip on my sword, my father's teachings ringing clear in my mind. A knight does not seek power for himself, but for those he serves. It is not strength that makes a knight, but the will to stand for what is right, no matter the cost. "I will not join you," I said, stepping forward, my voice steady. "You fell because you turned your back on the virtues that make us strong. I will not make the same mistake." The betrayer's eyes flared with fury, and he raised his sword, its edge gleaming with a sickly green light. "Then you will die?" he snarled. The battle began with a thunderous clash, his blade meeting mine with a force that sent shock waves through the chamber. He struck with a speed and power that belied his size, each blow a test of my strength and resolve. I blocked and parried, my movements driven by instinct and the countless hours of training my father had instilled in me. But his strikes were relentless, his attacks unyielding, and I found myself driven back, my shield dented and my arm trembling under the strain. "You cannot win," he growled, his voice reverberating like a storm. "You fight for ideals that have no place in this world." I gritted my teeth, forcing him back with a desperate counterattack. "You're wrong," I shouted. "The lady's light is stronger than your darkness, and her virtues will endure long after you are forgotten." The room seemed to shift, the oppressive shadows swirling around us as our blades clashed again and again. My muscles burned, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I refused to yield. Then, in a moment of clarity, I saw an opening. The betrayer raised his sword for a devastating blow, and I stepped inside his guard, driving my shield into his chest. He staggered, and I thrust my blade forward, piercing his armor. He roared in pain, but his fury only grew. He lashed out with a surge of power, throwing me back against the chamber wall. I struggled to my feet, my vision swimming. As he approached, his form flickering like a dying flame. "You cannot defeat me," he spat, his voice trembling with rage and desperation. I gripped my sword tightly, drawing on the last reserves of my strength. "I do not fight alone," I said, my voice steady despite the pain. "The lady guides me, and her light will prevail." As the betrayer lunged, I raised my blade, the faint glow of the lady's blessing shining brighter. Our swords met in a blinding flash of light, and I felt her presence, a warmth and strength that filled me with purpose. With a final cry, I drove my blade through his chest, the light surging outward and engulfing the chamber. The betrayer froze, his form shuddering as the shadows that bound him began to unravel. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "This cannot be." The light consumed him, and with a final burst of energy, he dissolved into nothingness. The oppressive weight of the chamber lifted, the air growing still and warm as the curse that had held Mont for centuries was broken. I sank to my knees, my sword clattering to the ground as I bowed my head. The battle was over, but the lessons it had taught me would remain. True knighthood was not about proving oneself, it was about faith, humility, and the courage to stand against even the darkest of foes. The lady's light filled the room one last time, a gentle warmth that seemed to whisper words of comfort and pride. I closed my eyes, offering a silent prayer of gratitude before rising to my feet. The keep was crumbling around me, its dark power unraveling, but my path was clear. I sheathed my sword and turned toward the light of the rising sun, ready to carry the lessons of Mont into the battles yet to come. Chapter 15. A Knight Reborn. The first light of dawn pierced the horizon, spilling over the ruins of Mont like a benediction. The once oppressive shadows that had choked the keep were gone, swept away by the lady's light. The cursed halls, so heavy with despair and hatred, now stood silent, their dark power shattered. I stood in the courtyard, my breath misting in the chill morning air. Around me, the spectral knights, freed from their torment, began to fade. Their forms shimmered in the golden light, no longer twisted by anger or regret. They stood tall and proud, their hollow eyes filled with something I had not seen before: peace. One by one, they turned to face me. The leader, his armor gleaming faintly in the sunlight, stepped forward. His voice, no longer burdened by anguish, was clear and resolute. "You have done what we could not, Sir Julien," he said. "You have lifted the curse and restored honor to this place. We owe you a debt we cannot repay." I lowered my sword and bowed my head. "It was not my strength alone that freed you," I replied. "The lady's light guided me, and her virtues showed me the way. I merely carried her will." The knight inclined his head, a faint smile gracing his spectral visage. "Even so, you have proven yourself worthy of the title you bear. Carry this lesson with you, Sir Julien. Knighthood is not found in glory, but in service." With those final words, he and his brothers dissolved into the morning air, their forms scattering like dust on the breeze. I watched them go, my chest heavy with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. They were free at last, their long torment ended. As the last of the knights faded, the ground beneath my feet began to tremble. The keep, its dark foundation broken, was crumbling. Towers that had loomed menacingly now collapsed in on themselves, their stones crashing to the earth in great plumes of dust. I turned and made my way to the gates, the path ahead illuminated by the rising sun. Beaufort waited for me just beyond the ruined walls, his ears flicking nervously at the rumble of falling stone. "Patience, old friend," I said, stroking his neck as I mounted. "The worst is over." We rode away at a steady pace, the sound of the keep's collapse fading behind us. When we reached the edge of the forest, I reined Beaufort to a halt and turned to look back. What had once been a towering symbol of despair and betrayal was now little more than rubble, its dark legacy erased by the lady's light. Yet, even as the ruin stood silent, I knew the lessons of Mont would remain with me. I bowed my head, offering a silent prayer. "Lady of the Lake, thank you. Your light has shown me the way, and I will carry it with me always. May I never stray from the path you have set before me." As I straightened, I felt a warmth in my chest, a quiet assurance that I was not alone, that the lady's guidance would remain with me, no matter how far I traveled. Beaufort snorted, eager to move, and I spurred him forward. The road stretched before us, winding through the rolling hills of Bretonnia and into the unknown. My quest was far from over. The Grail, the ultimate symbol of the lady's favor, still awaited. But for the first time since setting out, I felt truly ready. Mont had tested me in ways I had never imagined, forcing me to confront not only external foes but also the flaws within myself. I had faced doubt, fear, and despair, and emerged stronger for it. I was still young, still untested in many ways, but I understood now that knighthood was not about perfection. It was about striving, about standing firm in the face of adversity, and about serving something greater than oneself. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I allowed myself a small smile. The road ahead was long, and it would not be easy, but I was Sir Julien de Calmont, Knight Errant of Bretonnia, and I would face whatever came with courage, honor, and compassion. With the lady's light to guide me, I pressed onward, ready to meet the challenges that awaited on the path to the Grail.